Jenny
Jenny
Murphy.
Waxberg Murphy. I
Okay.
went from a Waxberg to a Murphy.
I love it. It has a
So,
great flow to it. Great flow to it. Thank you so much for taking the time out to do this with me. I know you have a very busy life. I'm sure you had to move some stuff around, so I appreciate that.
you too. Toddler
Yeah.
moms.
This is awesome. We finally connected. I'm so thankful that Aisha, connected us. Aisha is one of my bestest friends. And so when she came to me and was like, oh, you got to speak to Jenny, my boss, she's like amazing. So obviously I was all game.
Yes.
Um, yeah. How are you doing?
Good. It's so funny, like when Aisha told me about you wanting to talk or wanting us to connect, it was like one of those things that my friends and I have been talking about. I've been like the fertility expert on the team and things that I've had to deal with like before others had to deal with it.
Yeah.
And they were like, you should be on a podcast. Like you have to tell everybody about your experience and everything you've gone through, and so other people don't have to figure it out or feel like they're alone. So
Yeah.
it's kismet.
It was meant to be. It was meant to
Yeah,
be.
that's it.
Well, I like the whole point of this podcast, like the reason why I started it is because um, you know, right before becoming pregnant myself and then going through pregnancy and afterwards, what became super apparent to me is, there's all these issues that women deal with, all these like issues, challenges, things that are super common and yet we never hear about, are not a thing at all. Half the time you find that even the medical community like doesn't talk about it,
Yeah.
doesn't give the time of day to it.
Oh,
And it's quite shocking how you kind of find yourself in these positions where there are women all around us who are experiencing similar things,
yeah.
but it's kind of hard to open the door and talk to people on such personal
Yeah.
matters unless you
Yeah.
kind of arrived to it organically, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Right.
um
Yeah. Like
so
it's
yeah.
either like, if it happens to you, or like you hear about another person that maybe told another person, and then you're like, oh, should I ask them? Or, do they want to be private about it?
Mhm.
Or,
Mhm.
it's sensitive because, like you said, like it's just not an open, like, topic, like what everybody's like posting on Instagram, like, oh, I'm pregnant and it was like so easy, but like, maybe they went through like 3 rounds of IVF, like you have no idea. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's important.
I do
Just
feel like on the positive note, I feel like social media is kind of pushing people to start
yeah,
having more
yeah,
conversation on these things. And, I feel like the argument could be like, maybe some people like celebrities are doing it for self-promotion or whatever. But
yeah,
I mean, if that still opens up a conversation,
yeah.
is it
We're
really
moving
that
moving
bad?
towards it, right? Moving
Yeah,
towards it.
yeah, exactly. So, with that said, we can get right into it. So, PCOS is a polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Okay.
Can you, I guess if you want to start from the beginning, can you
Yeah.
talk to me about how you knew that you had it?
Yeah, yeah. So like a lot of couples, like my husband and I like got married and we were like, okay, we have some time to wait. And then like when we're ready to start having a baby, like we'll, pull the barrier, pull the goalie.
Mm-hmm.
So we did that. And then, we didn't get pregnant like right away. Like a lot of people are like, oh, like once you're off birth control, like you got to be careful, because like then you'll just get pregnant. And like that
Mm-hmm.
did not happen. So I went to my OB-GYN, and I just felt like there was something, I had been on birth control since I was 16. I had irregular periods when I was little. I had like bad acne. Like there were, I had a little bit of trouble like losing weight, and like those are the kind of things that should or could have raised some flags to like look into, hormonal levels or things like that. But instead I was just on birth control
But
for
also, a lot of that
many
stuff is
years.
like teenager stuff,
Right,
right?
exactly. No,
Like the
yeah,
acne, yeah. So
yeah, yeah.
I can see why somebody would experience that and just be like, oh, this is just an age thing. This is what
Yeah,
happens. But
exactly.
okay.
Exactly. Like it wasn't like I was like, oh, okay, like something's wrong with me. It was just like those are small things. Now that I know more, it was like
Mm-hmm.
small kind of flags. But then, when I went to the OB-GYN, like they were like, oh, well, have you ever been off of birth control or anything? And I was like, no, like, it was my teenage years in college. I always wanted to be on birth control.
Mm-hmm.
So then they said, okay, well, you need to, since you're under, I think it was like under 30 or under 35, you have to be trying for at least a year for
Mm-hmm.
us to do any tests into your fertility. And so, I was like, that makes no sense to me. Like, why would I wait an entire year of like trying, like basically just having like unprotected sex or whatever, then if I feel like something is wrong, like I want to have all of the information. Like I'm very data based. I like to know everything. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so it just didn't make sense to me. So I was like, okay, well, I've been trying for a year. And they were like, oh, okay. Well, if that's the case, then like, we'll do your blood test. We'll do an ultrasound. We'll, do all of these things to, see if there's something going on. And that's what I tell like my friends and people. And it's like, just trying to advocate for yourself. Like, what is it? Like, how do they know that you've been trying a year or not? And like, blood work and knowing your own hormonal levels, knowing your own body with ultrasounds, like if it's available, like we should be able to do it. It just, it doesn't make sense to me. So that's what I did. I advocated for myself. I got blood tests and I got the ultrasound.
It is funny how it's like a little weird. They're kind of like, you're like, hey, I've been trying and it's not working. And they're like, hey, go
Yeah.
back and try harder.
Yeah.
And
For
then come
longer.
back. Yeah, and then come
and
back
like,
and tell us again. You're like, but I'm an adult woman. I'm telling you that
right.
okay.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And like at that point I was over 30. Like I knew I wanted to have children. I've always wanted to have children. Um, I wanted to have more than one child. So like, it just felt like the timeline, like we were ready. And like, so we wanted to keep going. And, I've heard things of like, if you do have fertility issues or anything, like it does take time. Like every cycle is a whole month. It just seemed like I knew I wanted to do more. I wanted to be more proactive in it. Yeah. So then I got my blood results back and my ultrasound back, and like the ultrasound, like right away, the tech kind of can't really tell you anything, but he was like, well, I see like ovarian cysts here, like in your ovaries, which can indicate polycystic ovarian syndrome. And but they were like, but we have to wait for your doctor to like confirm anything. So then my doctor called and she said, your hormonal levels are a little bit off, like a little bit higher for like some of the testosterone levels, and that I had like the very clear ovarian cysts, like they're like kind of called like pearls in a row. So like it's like the egg in your ovary like grew, but then never like released. So then it like kind of leaves cysts. And so it had just like a bunch of cysts on both sides. Which like, there's no way I would possibly know that without an ultrasound. I think like when I got that news and when I got that call, I was like devastated. Like I had never heard of like that was a possibility. I didn't know anything about it. It sounded like a terrible thing. The doctor was like, okay.
Just the name
like
PCOS
yeah,
sounds
exactly.
scary. Like what?
Yeah,
That
you're
sounds
like,
like
oh
like
my
a
gosh,
scary
like
big thing.
yeah, like what is this? And like, and then it came to that point that like we were talking about before of like, well, why didn't I know I had this like my entire life? If this was something that I could have like been doing dietary changes or lifestyle changes like all along, like I don't know if things would have been different. It just like made me angry that I was like, didn't know about it. There was nothing to have like helped me to know that I had something like that before. And like, and like, it just made me feel alone because they were like, okay, well, and then of course I went down like the Google like wormhole of like looking at all these things of like, well, what about PCOS and pregnancy and all these things? It has like a slightly higher risk of insulin resistant, a slightly higher risk of being overweight, excess body hair, like a slightly higher chance of miscarrying, things like that. And then, like a slightly harder time to maybe conceive, a slightly higher chance of like not having successful breastfeeding. Like it was just like all of these things. And it just felt like it was like a cascading thing of like, oh my God, this sounds really bad. But then after I had started to talk to my friends, I found out that like at least 3 of my friends also have it. And like a couple of them had already had children. So then I was like, okay, so it can't be that bad. And then I, talked to my doctor and they were like, okay, yeah, like of all of the things, this is very common. And like actually a lot of women have this. And I don't know if you have this stat of like how many women do have it, because
You
they
know,
don't really like.
I read that it's like 1 out of every 10.
Right.
I don't know
Yeah.
if you
That's
have
okay. So
a
that's what I
different
thought. I just didn't
statistic.
want to say
Yeah.
it unless like, but
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
it's very, very common. And like, there is a chance that like people have it and they just don't know.
So
Yeah.
is this something that people are born with, or they develop it at some point in their life?
Honestly, I have no idea because I feel like there just has not been enough research or like
Wow.
medical attention into this. And that's crazy because if it's 1 in 10, like it's so common, they should do more work into investigating where it comes from or like how to fix it, other than like, you know, when this happened, they were like, okay, well, you just have to do like lifestyle changes. The way to like move forward is like to be on birth control. And it's like, well, that doesn't help
Yeah.
at all.
And then,
you know?
and to think about it in hindsight, if it's something that you have from the beginning, and
Right.
as a teenager, you're going
Right.
through some of these problems of like inconsistent periods and acne.
Right.
If you know that it's coming from a syndrome versus like just teenage stuff, then
Right.
you could, in hindsight, take a different approach from
Right.
then. So no, I can only imagine your frustration when you're
Yeah.
being told this when you're 30 and you're trying to
Yeah.
move into like the next phase of life.
Right.
Um,
Right.
okay, so you're going home, you're
Yeah.
doing all your research.
Yeah.
What's next?
Yeah. I mean, I remember that night I was like crying and like, I told my husband and like, he started like I called him at work and he started looking into it. And then he was like, let's go to a nice dinner. And I remember he like took me to this nice dinner. We're sitting there and then I was like crying more because I was like, oh my gosh, like it's going to be so hard for us to like have children now. Or like, I've always been like a kind of controlling person in my life. And this was like it felt like the first time in my life that I had like zero control. I had no idea this was happening and like I have no control on like what's going to happen, because it felt like to me I was like, okay, I'm going to stop being on birth control and then I'm going to get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was like I could control like the next step.
Yeah.
And like I have 2 sisters. They did get pregnant like right away and I was like, okay, well, I'm the 3rd sister, like I should have like the same experience. My sister, my older sister, like basically picked her daughter's birthday because like that's like how consistent they were, and I was like, I'm gonna have the same thing. And it just felt like, again, like that feeling of like being alone and like, why is this happening to me?
So your
But
sisters don't have it. Your sisters never
no,
had it.
no,
Huh.
no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
and what about your mom or grandma?
I don't know. I mean, my mom did have like fibroids, so like
Okay.
maybe it's like related, but probably
Okay.
not because it's something, you get later in life possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't think so. And like as far as I'm concerned, like they didn't really have the same kind of like difficulties. So yeah, so my husband took me to dinner that night. He let me cry. He was like, "It's okay. Whatever happens, happens. Like we're in this together. Let's figure out what the next step is." So then we pursued like fertility treatments, and like then going to the first clinic that we went to, they were very aggressive. They were like, "Okay, like let's go straight for medicated cycles. Let's go straight for like IUIs."
So
And
can I
like,
can I ask at this point, is the first line of defense looking for ways to like treat the symptoms of the PCOS, or is it straight to like how do we figure out how to get you pregnant?
yeah, It kind of
Wow.
was like, they were
Okay.
like, okay, well, if you have that, it's like, well, this is like a syndrome, like it's very common. Like the first place that we went to, I was not that happy with. It just kind of felt like a factory, like a baby factory. It's like the first step is this and this and this and that, like it was just like very aggressive. And it felt like they were like, okay, well, with PCOS, you're like, you're overweight and like you should like go to a nutritionist and like try and lose weight, try and not stress about it because that makes it worse. And like, that's literally the least helpful piece of advice anybody can give you when you're trying to get pregnant. Because it is, to me, one of the most stressful things and like just completely consuming things. And then like to tell somebody, okay, well, if you stress, that makes it worse. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to stress more about it. Thanks.
It's like don't stress about it, but
Yeah.
also we're not gonna offer you any peace of mind towards how
Yeah.
to like deal with it
Yeah,
or
except
how
like,
to.
oh, go lose weight, which is like, okay, yeah, like that's been like,
Okay.
welcome to the club of saying that. Like that's not that's not
Well,
helpful.
from what I've read, that's not even the ultimate solution. Like I read that
Right.
that could help some women, but
Yeah.
not necessarily everybody, and it could help a
Right.
little bit, but not like
Yeah.
fully resolve the challenge anyway.
Right. Yeah, and like some people who have PCOS like don't have any like weight issues or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that. So, yeah, it was just it just didn't feel like they were supporting like me as a person. They were supporting like my uterus to like grow an egg and like try and, get pregnant right away. So like we, like I said, we did some like medicated cycles. So like basically, you get your period, you go for monitoring, you go for like daily blood tests, you go for like daily ultrasounds, like seeing where your levels are, and then like adding medicine in. So like usually it's been like Clomid or like letrozole to like try and grow your egg. And then sometimes they'll do like a shot, release your egg, and then to do IUI, which is like, your partner like they use their like sperm and then turkey baste it into you, and
Mm-hmm.
you like sit there and hope that like you grew the egg big enough, you had the shot to like release the egg, and then they like bring the sperm right to it, and you
Mm-hmm.
hope you get pregnant. So like that didn't work for us a few times. So we did that, we stayed at that clinic for a few times, like and like I said, it just felt like very much a factory, and like I would see a different doctor every time, and it just didn't feel personal. So
Can
we
I
at that
ask,
point.
just to clarify, because I know you did mention that you were on birth control like pretty much your entire life up until this point.
Yeah.
Once you got off birth control, did you start having periods or you weren't having them and you had to have them like
Yeah.
medically induced kind of? Because
Yeah.
that's what I
So like,
understand to be a part of this
right.
syndrome.
So leading, like probably a year before we got married, my period completely disappeared. Like
Okay.
I was not, like even like the kind of like fake periods you have on birth control, like I wasn't even getting that. And at that point I had gone to the OB-GYN, and they did an ultrasound. And that's also what's frustrating, is like they did an ultrasound, but just of my uterus as opposed to my ovaries. And at that point they were like, oh, well, your lining's super thin, which happens when you've been on birth control for a long time, and it's not a problem.
Hmm. Okay.
Which I don't
Yeah, it's still, it
know.
kind of seems like they're doing some things, but everyone is
Right.
like nobody's willing to take a look at the whole picture. They're just
Right,
kind of
right.
picking and choosing what they want to pay
Exactly.
attention to.
Exactly. Like it's
Okay.
kind of like that like whole health mentality. This is all of this is me. So like I wish you would not look at like the one singular, focus of like whatever that issue is. Like if you had like done a more holistic full picture assessment, like maybe you would have known like at that point that like part of PCOS is also like that the anovulation, like we said, like of not getting your period at all. That could also be PCOS, like irregular periods or no periods.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so yeah, I wasn't having a period for a long time before that. When I went off of the birth control, I was getting a period, but it was like very irregular.
Okay.
Like sometimes it was like 32-day cycles, or like
Okay.
so it was just like, and sometimes it was like 28, like so it was just very irregular. But
Got it. So you start going
um
to this clinic and they're
yes.
treating your uterus,
Right.
not
Yes.
you. They're treating your
Right.
uterus, just to be
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
and you said it feels like a factory. Why do
Yeah.
you say that?
Like I saw a different doctor every time. It just felt like, okay, like let's push you through. Like it felt almost like a waxing place or like a tanning salon where it's just like, okay, you go in this door, you go down the hall, do this and like walk out. Like it's like you do the ultrasound, you do the blood test, you walk out. This circular thing. And it just
Mm-hmm.
felt very like not personal and just they weren't really thinking about me. It was just like, okay, I was patient zero, and then it's like patient zero has this, and this. Okay, let's try the next step, move on. Like it just it didn't feel like what I was hoping in that experience, especially because, like I was having a lot of emotions and like having a lot of like trouble dealing with this anyways. Then sitting in this room with 20 other women, like, it just wasn't what I was looking for. So we moved to a different clinic
Mm-hmm.
where the doctor sees you every single time. It's the same doctor, he has the same nurses, and it just felt like more my speed. Like I wanted to talk to the doctor. I wanted to ask like all of my million questions. Like, and it was interesting in the intake. And I have to say, like, I've heard this from a few different people that they have had to move clinics. And a lot of people are like, I wish I moved clinics earlier. I just felt like it didn't fit in or whatever it is. And like, I think that people are hesitant to do that because they make the intake so hard. You literally have to like, it's this pile of like paperwork of like all of your medical information, like all of your husband's medical information. Like we did genetic testing, which was like forced on us to do like right away because they were like, well, if there's anything that we pick up in the genetic markers that could be something, we would move past all of these other stages and go straight to IVF. So it's like you have to submit that, like, and you have to do your entire like reproductive history. So like I do understand why people hesitate to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I do encourage people, like my ending story is that I have two beautiful children. Like I have my son who's 3.5 and I have my daughter who's going to be 10 months now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that like that hesitation to like kind of trust your gut and like just push forward. It definitely, I've heard it before too. And that is what happened to us. But we did end up going to 4 different clinics, like not because we weren't happy, but we also moved from New York City to Connecticut.
Okay.
But yeah, we went through like that intake process multiple times. So I understand like the hesitation, but we moved to the new clinic during the intake. The doctor had a much less aggressive approach. He
Okay.
looked at all of my medical history and he was like, just so you know, like PCOS is very common. And he was like, especially like, and he was like, you're 30, like you're young. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, I feel
Yeah,
better because
thank
like in the
you.
other
Thank
clinic,
you.
like, it felt like, oh my God, you're already 30. And like, and he was like, you're young on this spectrum. Like you have a very common thing. He hadn't like treated me yet, but he was like, I have a feeling it's possible you've never ovulated and like you've never given your body the chance to ovulate. Maybe we just need to go through a few of these cycles to like build up these eggs, get them to release. Like maybe that's what it's going to be.
So
But he
so
was like,
this is so this is the last clinic, right? That you ended
yeah,
up staying with.
yes,
Okay.
yes. And
You know,
it was with them that we got pregnant with my son.
that's
Um,
awesome. And you know what?
yeah,
Honestly, like this also begs the question of, I think in our society, like in general, there is so much or rather like so little understanding of the connection between the mental and the physical. And to
yeah,
think it's like you are already in a place where you're struggling to accept and figure out this thing that's happening to you.
right,
And naturally, when you go to a clinic and you're being treated as like a number,
right,
that's
yeah,
not adding anything. So,
no,
it's curious to me that, the place where you ended up going and it
yeah,
ended up being successful for you, it also
yeah,
just happened to be a doctor that was the most pleasant for you to
yeah, yeah.
associate with. So that's
Yeah. I
yeah.
don't know. It like for me it was right. Like I understand like maybe the other clinic like where people wanted to take a more aggressive approach, like didn't really mind like not having like that personal interact. Some people are more private. Like maybe they just want to go through the motions and just get it done
Mhm.
with. But like, my husband came to every single appointment at 6 a.m., for blood work and for the monitoring and all these things, like with that doctor. And, it was right for us. And like, we took a less aggressive approach, not doing like those shots and not doing like the IUIs, like just going through a medicated cycles to like grow my eggs. And, they look at the ultrasound, like see them, ovulate. Like, so we did that a few times. Like the eggs were getting big, they were getting to be a nice size. My hormone levels were good. And so then our last cycle of doing that before we moved up to the next step, like, he wanted us to do it a few times, and he was like, very much in that journey with us of like, okay, what do you want to do? Like, where do you feel comfortable? Like, are you feeling pressure to move to like the next, like kind of, step? So then we were in the last cycle that we were comfortable doing just like the lowest level of medicated cycles. And that's when we got pregnant with our son. So we were, of course, really happy with that. And, he's here now.
I'm sure. That's so awesome. What's his name?
Yeah.
What's your son's
Desmond.
name? Desmond. Awesome. Yeah. And and you have a daughter?
Yes. Lily.
Lily, Desmond and Lily. Yeah. That's so awesome. Yeah. That's great. So how long did it take in total before you started the treatments to when you finally became successfully pregnant?
Yeah. So it took us like a year and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And how was your pregnancy? Did you have like a fairly straightforward pregnancy?
Easy pregnancy. I feel like, my husband and I talk about it, like it took so much to get there that like we were just so lucky to have like an easy pregnancy that it was like, okay, my body had been through enough. I don't even know the countless amounts of transvaginal ultrasounds that I had at that point. And like my arms were all bruised and like they were like pin cushions, like because you do blood work like multiple times, and I had already been through like those things. So it was kind of like, okay, like now we're pregnant. We were lucky. But then of course, like I was pregnant. I found out that I was pregnant in November 2019. Mm-hmm. And then, then it was COVID.
Fun times began. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I hear you. I got pregnant with my daughter in 2020. So it was, I think I found out, I had her in March. So I think I found out like the previous summer I found out. So, that was a very peculiar time. My husband couldn't go to anything with me, none of the appointments. I mean, people always ask like, were you sad? Did it feel, like lonely? And I mean, and I've never known it any other way. So I feel like for me, it was okay. I wonder for you, because your husband had to come with you to all the other things. It was probably like, oh, but now, like, how much was he able to attend it, like during your actual pregnancy?
He was able to go to the first appointment to like hear his heartbeat. And then he went to like the first, not the anatomy scan, but like the 12-week, pretty much like just the first one for like the heartbeat. And then, like after like 20 weeks on, like he wasn't allowed to go to anything. And like, when we moved to Connecticut, we moved with my parents for 18 months, which I think a lot of people did, but, if we tested positive for COVID, if I tested positive for COVID when we went to the hospital to deliver him, like I would have had to be alone. And like, I would have had to like deliver him by myself. He wouldn't have been able to like meet his child until like we left the hospital, which was like so stressful for me and made me very, very anxious at the end. So, my parents graciously, and we just completely locked down for like multiple months where we did not leave the house because I was just so scared that I was going to be alone in the hospital.
Sure.
And like we got groceries delivered and like everything, like we did not leave the house.
Yeah. And so he attended the birth, right?
Yes. Okay, we were negative and he was there. I was in labor for 48 hours. We went to the hospital and I did not progress past 6 centimeters and ended up with a C-section. But It's okay. I mean, I was okay with it. Like, I accepted it as a fate. My mom had 3 C-sections. My sisters both had 4 C-sections. So I accepted that it was part of my fate. And I think that that was, like the mindset going in was like, this is a possibility. So like,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay. Like, I'm okay with that. So
Okay. That's not the most, listen, the most important thing is you had a healthy baby
yeah, exactly.
and now he's
Exactly.
growing up and
Yeah.
that's a beautiful thing. Okay.
Yeah.
And so then you had a second child.
Yes.
How long
Yes.
after? And talk to me about what that pregnancy, getting
Yeah.
pregnant and all of that. What was that
Yeah.
like?
Yeah. So after we had Desmond, like I just never wanted to go back on birth control at all because I was like, I don't know. Like I want a second child. So we got pregnant again around like his first birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And then unfortunately we miscarried. It was
Okay.
early in the pregnancy. Not that it matters.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we miscarried. I passed it naturally,
Mm-hmm.
which to me was like very traumatic. Like
Yeah.
it was, I don't know what I was expecting a
Mm-hmm.
miscarriage to feel like, but it was like full labor pains and like the bleeding, like I was going through giant pads, like very, very quickly. And the pain was just so, so horrible that I ended up like in the hospital. Um, and then, they did ultrasounds and they were like, okay, well, you're passing it. And, and they like gave me pain medicine and, you know, we got through it, but it was just extremely
How far along
horrific
were
for me.
you?
We were only around like 10 weeks.
Okay. Okay.
But we never heard a heartbeat or, anything like that for that miscarriage. Um, so that was unfortunate. And then, a few months later, we actually got pregnant again. And then, we miscarried again. And, we went for hearing the heartbeat, which was like, you know, very anxiety inducing for me again of like going to the appointment and like luckily my husband was able to go and sit with me and I was like sweating and like crying already like before we even like got in the room but like
Mm-hmm.
then we didn't see a heartbeat again and miscarried and this time I was like I cannot go through like passing it again
Okay.
so we decided to go for a DNC.
Mm-hmm.
So we went for a DNC and, I think, the procedure itself is like not that difficult. Like, it's done quickly and, you rest and, you have a little bit of cramping, but it was like nowhere near as like, as traumatic for me as the first one. And, so we miscarried again, unfortunately. And then, a few months after that, we started treatments like fertility treatments again.
Mm-hmm.
So, we started doing like the ultrasounds and blood work and all of the things. And I kept getting like, negative pregnancy tests.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, so then we bought a house and decided to like settle in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, doing those treatments and like, doing those treatments and things is really time consuming. You have to go like every morning, you have to take the medicine, you have to go to the pharmacy, you have to, do all these things. So we were like, we're buying a house, like let's, take a break because it
Mm-hmm.
just is it's stressful to buy a house. And, at the clinic, they say like, okay, like, when you get your period, like email us, you'll come in, you'll, start it all again. So they were like, okay, email us when you get your period. And so I just like didn't get my period and like still didn't get my period. My husband was like, I think you should probably like do a pregnancy test. And I was like, well, we didn't do any treatments. So like, no, we're probably
You're
not
like, I
pregnant. I'm
don't
probably
believe it.
just,
It can't
yeah, I was like,
happen.
I'm
It's
probably
no
just having
way.
like an irregular period again,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't take a pregnancy test. We like moved into our new house, like, and I unpacked like our entire house and settled everything in. And I was like, I am so tired. And I was like, like this is exhausting. And I was like, I'm exhausted. And then my husband was like, I really think you should probably do a pregnancy test. And I did. And I was pregnant and, everything went smoothly from there. And we were super,
Awesome.
super lucky, super happy that we had like this,
So
little
you
rainbow baby. And
so you went through three miscarriages between
two
your first
miscarriages.
two
Yeah.
miscarriages
Yeah.
between your first and second
Yeah.
pregnancies.
Yeah.
I can only imagine how challenging that must have been. One thing
Yeah.
I have to just say, in doing these podcasts, something that I noticed, naturally, most people I've been speaking to have been women. And I always
Yeah.
find it fascinating that when women share stories of like these crazy, difficult things that they go through, we always talk about it with a smile. It's like, yeah, and then I had a miscarriage and then this and
Yeah.
I just think that's such an interesting just element of who women are. Like we tend to
Yeah.
just kind of gloss over the stuff, keep it moving, like be really, really strong. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really beautiful thing, but it's also just like such a
Yeah.
statement on how society sort of deals with these kinds of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
No,
mean,
I
I
totally
commend you
agree.
for, for having gone through that. And I'm sure that
Yeah.
was not an easy journey for you. And
No.
then come out of the other
No.
side and have
Yeah.
another child.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like I listened to some of your previous episodes and like, yeah, I do think that that's kind of interesting. It's like, you know, at the time it was devastating and like,
Mm-hmm.
I cried so much and like, I really didn't tell a lot of people. I like went back to work like soon.
Sure.
Like, I don't even know if I took off time. Like, I just like moved past it and like didn't want to talk about it. I was just
Mm-hmm.
like, let's just move on from it. It's just like, I can't really, do anything
Yeah.
about it. I did some therapy. I went to like some support groups. But it was kind of it. I don't know. I don't know if that's good or bad that like women are,
No,
they have the ability of like being resilient and like, it's, I feel for anybody who's like going through it or anyone who has gone through it. Like it was terrible. And like, especially in that moment, it was like absolutely life
yeah,
crushing,
sure.
but
I don't think
yeah,
I wouldn't even label it as good or bad. I think
yeah,
it's just one of those testaments to our
yeah,
resilience.
yeah, yeah,
And specifically with miscarriages, to be quite honest with you, that was one of the first topics that sort of got me moving in the direction of asking people of like what else is
yeah,
going on. And
yeah, yeah,
miscarriages are another thing that's incredibly common. It happens to like
yeah.
I believe it's like if not half, like one out of every four
I think
women
it's one
will
in
have
four. Yeah.
it.
Hmm.
And I've had a couple of women on my podcast who have gone through it. And yeah, that's very much another one of those things that's super
Yeah.
common. And I've never heard of it growing up. I'm
Yeah.
not sure
Yeah.
if you have, and or
No.
if you did hear about it, I
Yeah.
feel like there's always like a context of like something happened, maybe she
Hmm.
fell or, like
Yeah.
an accident,
Yeah.
but then you come to find out it just happens for no
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah. 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 So our first, so yeah. So one of my friends like had a miscarriage when we were younger. She had, gotten pregnant early and she had a miscarriage. And I remember I was like crying about it. And I like told my mom, I was like, oh, I'm really sad. Like my friend was pregnant and she miscarried. And she was like, oh, I had a miscarriage. And I was like, what? I was like, never talked about that. Like she had talked about like one of her friends who had a stillborn, which,
Mm-hmm.
obviously was very, very devastating. But like,
Yeah.
she was like, yeah, I had actually had two miscarriages. And I was like, like between like my sisters and and like, I was like, well, why didn't you tell me about that? And she was like, well, it's never come up,
What do you
and it's
attribute
like,
it to? Why do you
yeah,
think women don't want to talk about this stuff?
I mean, I think, to me, I had this feeling of like, oh, my body failed me. Like, this is what my body is supposed to do. And like, it failed me. I don't know. It's hard. Like, I think for me, it's like, I wanted to move on,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I don't know. I think that that's part of like why I wanted to come on this podcast too. Let's talk about it more. Like, let's make it the 1 in 4, like if that's what it is. We can all talk about it because,
Yeah.
you know, chances are it might happen, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. I don't
And if
know.
it does,
Yeah.
and if it does happen, the main takeaway would be to like to not feel guilt, not feel
Yeah.
shame. You
No,
know,
exactly.
there are a myriad of emotions to
Yes. Yes.
feel when that happens, but
Yes.
the ones not on the list at all should be guilt and shame and
Yeah.
feeling like you failed, because
Yeah.
again, it's just one of those
Yeah.
things that
Yeah.
happens, and if we talk
Yeah.
about it more, then we would
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And it was
thank
like
you.
just, yeah, exactly. And it was just another one of those things that I was like, oh, why me? But it's like, you know, if it happens to a lot of people, it's just like I'm just one of the people that it happened to. And like it's okay. And like, you know, I'm not alone. And, you know, there's a lot of other people that can connect to like that experience and like that feeling of loss and sadness and like, you know, thinking about like that date that like you would have had your baby or like,
Hmm.
you know, what their birthday would have been or, you know, things
Yeah.
like what your family would have been like if I had 4 kids right now instead of like our 2, you know. So it's, you know,
A lot
it's
of
hard.
laundry. A lot of laundry,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
um. Uh. So. Uh. So now that you've had your 2 children, how old are they? Remind me.
Yeah. So my son Desmond's going to be 4 this summer. So he's like 3.5. And then
Okay.
Lily will be 10 months soon.
Oh, that's so beautiful. My daughter just turned 3, March 6th. We had a big party for her. Yeah, she's so cute.
Yeah. Like it's funny. People talk about like terrible 2s, but I thought they were so cute at 2. And then 3, I think it's like 3-nager. Like they now all of a sudden they like have like really really strong opinions and they have the way to communicate their those feelings
Mm-hmm.
too. And like so I got 3-nager is a little challenging.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's like, it's funny because I feel like they start testing you from 2,
Yeah.
but I feel like when at 3, when they are testing you, they do it consciously. Like they
Yeah.
know they're testing you. And I'll see
Yeah.
my daughter all the time, like going to do something she's not supposed to. And she'll be like, looking over to see if I'm catching her or not, or to
Yeah.
see for my reaction. So no,
Yeah.
I agree with you. I mean, I don't know. I've never been one to sort of buy into that the horrible 2 ideas,
No.
because I don't know. For me personally, the first year was like the absolute hardest, when they
Me
just
too.
require you
Me too.
all the time for
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then when they start to become a little bit more independent, they can eat on their
Yeah.
own, they can
Yeah.
communicate clearer.
Yeah.
I felt it was tremendously easier already. And like,
Yeah.
yeah, that
Yeah.
comes, I guess, with more of like a mental load and
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
intellectual load.
Yeah.
But that's what makes it funny. That's what makes
Yeah,
it
I think so too.
entertaining.
I think so too. For me, you know, with Desmond, he was like a good eater, which is great. I think your whole life is around their eating or sleeping.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's crazy. But yeah, like he was a good eater, you know, a pretty good sleeper, but like for me, like the first few months of like nighttime feedings, I really wanted to breastfeed. I feel like people also didn't prepare me for how painful it could be in the beginning. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, if you ask lactation consultants, I think, oh yeah, they're like, it shouldn't be painful, but like, I think it is painful. You know, like, I don't know, maybe our latch was wrong or whatever it was. Getting through that and then like having just like these super long, dark nights. Like whenever people tell me that they're having their first child, I'm like, okay, just so you know, the beginning feels very dark and very long. And
Mm-hmm.
just so you know, it ends. Like at a certain
Mm-hmm.
point, it will end. Because I remember sitting in the dark, like at night, and just feeling like, oh my God, is this my life? Like, am I never going to sleep again? Like, am I going to
Mm-hmm.
feel like this forever? Granted, it was a global pandemic, and like you know, like all of those things. I think that probably contributed to me having like a little bit of postpartum anxiety or depression,
Yeah.
which I then went on medication for. But I also think there is something to be said of like just feeling like that stage will last forever.
Yeah,
But
for
knowing
sure.
that you will get through it, it will end. They will sleep. They will eat. It will be okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And like, I
Listen,
think this time around, like with my second child's, like, I think just having that knowledge of like, okay, this is not forever. Like, it's going to suck. You're not going to sleep, but it will end, you know?
yeah, yeah.
I
I
just felt
listen,
like,
the
okay,
feeling you're
I'm good.
the feeling you're
Yeah.
talking about is very, very familiar to me.
Yeah.
I very much remember those nights where you're like delirious
Yeah.
and nights and days are blending and it
Yeah.
feels
Yeah.
like you don't even have time to sit in the bathroom by yourself for like
Oh,
five
yeah.
minutes.
Yeah.
You find yourself like hiding behind the couch to drink a cup of
Yeah.
coffee so you could have like a minute to yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, now I remember that.
Especially like, I think especially with the second one with having a toddler and a newborn, because then you're like, I had a lot of anxiety before my daughter was born of like, oh, how can I love another being as much as I love my son, because
Mhm.
I love him so much.
Mhm.
And like, a lot of people are like, well, like you just do, like it just happens. And like, when she was born, I was like, okay, I get it. Like your heart is not divided, it's multiplied, like you do, like you do love them like just as much. And like, I just remember being like so scared that I wasn't going to be able to do that. And like, it happens.
I
you know
love that you're saying that because I have one daughter,
Yeah.
and my husband and I, we keep going back and forth if we want to go for number
Hmm.
two. We haven't decided yet. It's like an
Yeah.
ongoing conversation, but
Yeah.
the thing that you mentioned is like the literal thoughts that I've been going through. I love her
Yeah.
so much. I
So
can't get
much.
enough of her.
Yeah.
But I'm always like, oh, I just can't. Do I have the capacity
Yeah.
to spread the love and not?
Yeah.
You always hear stories about people who come from families with maybe multiple children, and like
Yeah.
some kid is bound to feel a little bit left out. And I guess
Yeah. Yeah.
I was raised. I'm the only child. I don't have any
Ah,
siblings.
okay.
So
Okay.
I feel like there's a part of that. Like I was raised with all the attention from my
Yeah.
family, and my husband comes from a family where he did have a brother.
Ah,
But all that to say is, I'm glad to hear you say that. Like it is possible. I guess
yes.
somewhere within me, I know it is, but it's always
Yeah.
nice to hear somebody else
Yeah.
kind of reaffirm that to you.
Yeah. And I definitely like, I was like 39 weeks pregnant and I was like, oh my God, like, what if I don't love her as much? Like, but you do. You do.
You do. Okay, good, good. So let me ask you this question. Since you've had your children, how has the PCOS journey continued for you? Like what happens now? Do you have to,
Yeah.
treatments? Talk to me about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good timing. I mean, since I have been breastfeeding, like, I haven't had a period until like literally last month. And I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't had a period in so long, like,
Mm-hmm.
and so I don't know. Honestly, like, there's a chance, like, now that I've like gotten naturally pregnant and all of those things, like, maybe this is definitely not a medical thing, but like maybe the PCOS was like knocked out of me. Like, because it does happen where sometimes like those symptoms like dissipate after childbirth and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So like, I'm like, maybe that happened for me. We'll see. But
Okay.
like, I did get like a period on my own without, like having to like kind of like medically force it, and so it came naturally and we shall see. We shall see. I
That's
mean,
amazing. I mean, I guess
yeah.
if we don't really know how it comes about, it's possible
Yeah.
that it may just kind of
Yeah.
go
Like,
away.
yeah, I mean, like, obviously having a baby or having multiple babies, like your body changes, like your hormones change, like all of those things like change. So I don't know. Yeah.
So I'm curious. You did mention that when you found this out, you started asking around, and you found that you did have some friends and women in your circle who had it as
Yeah.
well. Um, I'm curious if you know anything about how it's been for them since they had their kids. Like if there's some sort
Yeah.
of a pattern. Like has it kind of
Yeah.
also like receded for them a little bit? I don't
Yeah.
anything you could
Yeah.
share.
So I have two friends that have PCOS that they haven't had children. they do have super irregular, funky periods. Like it's hard for them. And then I have two friends who have PCOS that have had children, and the three of us all have had miscarriages. And two of us have had multiple miscarriages, which is unfortunate. And it does say that that is possible, like a higher likelihood with PCOS. And then one of my friends that has had her child, she thinks that the PCOS has like dissipated for her. Like she doesn't have, like she had a lot of pain with her periods and everything, prior to having children. And then when she had her child, like she doesn't have that anymore. And then, my other friend, like after her children, she has continued to have like multiple miscarriages, which is unfortunate. And then I do think she is having like some difficulties, like still with like a regular cycle.
Okay.
So,
So it
like I
varies.
think
It's
it's
like
like,
just
yeah, I
really
think,
different for
yeah,
everybody. What does your
yeah.
GYN say about it? I don't know. Have you had any discussions on this
I
subject?
mean, again, it's kind of like, well, do you want another child? And, I think we're probably going to stick with the two. So then they're like, okay, well, like the way to kind of like deal with this, if you do start to have like irregular periods or like, heavy periods or whatever it is, like to go back on birth control. And
Okay.
it's like, I don't know if I really want to do that. So then they're like, okay, well then, what you just kind of make
Okay.
lifestyle changes again, maybe try it. Yeah.
Yeah.
There isn't like a good road forward. There isn't a clear road forward for it.
But I guess that's kind of the testament to the confusion around this whole thing,
Right.
right? Is that it's not technically like a disease, it's a
Yeah.
syndrome, so it just
Right.
presents itself in all these
Very
various
different. Yeah.
ways.
Like you literally can have any sort of levels of hormones. Like you could have extra testosterone, or you could have extra estrogen, you can have no progesterone. Like there's so many. So it's not like, okay, this hormone level means you have it. It's not even that. Some people, like I said, like have hair issues or weight issues or other things, and some people don't. And like some people have like the pearls in a row on their ovaries and the cysts, and some people don't. And like, so it's like, I don't know. Yeah. Like all I could say is like, I would love if we could like advocate for more research and like more, more, more resources for people to have if they do have, this syndrome, like just more knowledge,
Yeah, yeah. That's the only way to make it not so vague.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
actually have like a clear cut path. Why do you
Yeah.
think I mean this is like a purely hypothetical rhetorical question, just
Yeah.
like why do you think they're not putting it, and why do you think there's so little effort in researching this and figuring this out for women? Like I'm just curious,
Yeah.
what is your
I think
take
it's
on
like,
it?
hopping on the soapbox of like, if this were happening to men, then we would have found a cure like decades ago, I'm sure. It's like, it's just, I think it's somehow a political issue of like, female and maternal health care. It's unfortunate, I think.
Yeah, I agree with
Just,
you. And there's another thing that you mentioned that also very much resonated with me early on. That when you started going through all the treatments and everything, you were always very much made to feel like you're just the vessel, and they're treating your uterus, and
yeah.
then you're kind of secondary. And I have
Mm-hmm.
to say, like, I agree with that. I feel like I had a pretty straightforward pregnancy, but even in that, I found myself, I journaled to like clear my head, and I still have entries from back then when I was feeling like society at large does kind of treat you like you sort of become a vessel and secondary to anything that's going on in your body.
Yeah.
And it's a strange thing.
It is a strange thing. And also, as I went through the journey, like of like infertility, like 40% of infertility issues are from the man. Like 40%. So almost half the issues are male issues versus female issues. But currently, like really the only kinds of like routes you can go is like doing things to the woman to like, you know,
Yeah.
to try and move forward from there. And it's like, that is baffling to me.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
and you don't hear a lot of men. At least I haven't heard a lot of men professing like feeling of shame or guilt over these things either.
no.
So
Yeah,
there's just it's
no.
just such a it's like two totally separate worlds, but it's like
Yeah.
also one same world, and it's
Yeah.
interesting how much attention is kind of turned one way and not the other.
Yeah.
No, it's the whole thing is definitely fascinating. So it
Yeah.
sounds like your husband has been a great source of support for you
Yes.
throughout this
Yes.
whole thing.
Yes, yes. I've been super, super lucky. He's, gone on the journey with me. He's calmed me from being my anxious, controlling self. Like, he's just been like, we're in this together. Whatever happens, happens. Like, whatever, like, routes we have to take in medicine or adoption or surrogacy or whatever we want to do is like, we will figure it out together. And, that's been a blessing for me. I've been super lucky to have that support.
That's amazing. That's amazing. In hindsight, when you look over your journey of the difficulties in getting pregnant, but everything working out ultimately, but having gone through these ups and downs, what resources do you wish you could have had? That would have been useful to you and that you wish were just available so that other women in similar positions could have that to lean on.
Yeah. I think that, it goes back to what I said before of like really, you know, you should know your own body and you should like advocate for yourself. I wish that I didn't wait for me to be ready to already be pregnant. I had always wanted to have children. So like I wish that I could have and should have like known about my own status, my reproductive health, and I wish that I like had done ultrasounds and done the blood work and, like advocated for myself in my 20s to like know what was going on and that was possible for women to like feel comfortable and like that they could do that, because if I had been prepared for that, I think that my mental health and like my emotional state would have been different, like, and, like we had talked about, like, I think part of, maybe why I got pregnant was because I felt more comfortable or whatever it was. And, um, you know, and I wasn't as stressed about it.
Yeah.
But, if I had known earlier, like, I just think I would have had more acceptance of it and like more time to process that that's what was happening within my body, as opposed to like being angry and like frustrated and all of these things and had to process that at the time and also try and get pregnant. Like, hopefully I could have, known that already.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. And, it's like, it's like this interesting caveat, right? Because how would you have known if the doctors aren't
Yeah.
leading you into these
Right.
things? It's like the whole
Yeah.
reason some of us become doctors and some don't is because the ones that don't, we look to the people who are medical professionals to point these things out to us and guide us to the things that we need to know.
Yeah.
But that there does seem to be a sort of a trend in the medical community, and not to paint with a broad brush, I know
Yeah.
that there's a million doctors and nurses who
Of
are wonderful
course.
and caring,
Yes. Yeah.
but it is something that I have come to hear on several occasions, that people are just being dismissed or they're not kind of being looked into as much as they
Yeah.
should be.
Yeah.
um
They're like, well, you don't have a husband or a partner or anything yet. Like, why do you care if you can get pregnant? But it's like, but I want to at
what is
some
this
point.
what
Like,
is this
why is it? Yeah.
1865?
Yeah, exactly. Like, why do you care? Like, when this would happen? Like, I want to know for myself, like what the deal is. And like, and the thing is, like, with PCOS, like we said, like there is other health implications that are possible of like insulin resistance and all those other things that like can have compounding in like effects on your body. Like, I should have known that I had something with my body,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. There's almost like a little bit of this like paradoxical thing where
yeah.
everyone is super super focused and cares about like the well-being of the babies and stuff, which
Yeah.
obviously is the right thing to do. But again, the women, the people who are making the children are always kind of like, yeah, you just figure it out. Like, this is what we
Yeah.
care about. You'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know. I always go back to this. Like, I feel like there's like this overarching theme where, um, and I feel like, I don't know if you're like a religious person to any extent, but I'm big on the mindset of like, birthing children, having children in itself is such a miracle that
Yeah.
it really amazes me how much value society kind of places like on like the child itself, but how little value is placed on the human being who has to
Yeah.
go through the process,
Yes,
make it happen,
definitely.
and then like recover and like go back to work, go back to life, go back
Yes,
to being a contributing member of society. And that's why
exactly.
we need to be heard.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
why. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's is there before we part ways, is there anything else that maybe you'd like to share with my audience, or I don't know, or if you even have any questions for me, feel free to take the reins, or not. Totally up to you.
I think, I think at the end of the day, like, I think, you really got to advocate for yourself, and, it's your body, it's your life, your journey, and nobody else's. And, don't compare yourself to other people or other
Mhm.
people's fertility journeys or, parenthood journeys and all of those things. And I think, we're all trying to do the best that we can. And,
Mhm.
we're strong, resilient women, and we can do it and not feel alone and not feel shame, not feel guilt, like we talked about. And
Yeah.
uh,
Not be
this
so
is
hard.
it.
Not be so hard on ourselves about
Yeah.
this whole
Yeah.
thing. Let me ask you, in your journey, were there any points when somebody said to you, like asked you some sort of a question or said something that you're like, no, 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 never, never
Yeah.
ask this kind of thing?
I mean, yeah. I mean, people, of course, in the beginning, like right after you get married, people are like, oh, when are you having your baby? Like, when are you having your baby? And then, like,
Yeah.
or you like go to a baby shower or a kid's birthday, and they're like, well, you're next. And it like literally made me want to cry. Like, I'm like, you have no idea what's happening. Like,
Mm-hmm.
don't say that. Like, don't put pressure on me, because like I already feel it. I'm already going through it. And like, you don't know what I'm doing, So like, yeah, I think
Yeah. No,
don't ask. Like,
any questions,
yeah.
any questions regarding the plans to have kids or anything like that? Yeah.
Or a
I feel
second kid,
I feel
like,
like that should just be a public servant's announcement to like the whole world right now.
yeah,
Stop asking people what their children's
yes,
situation is, because
yes. Or like even as a joke like that of like, you're next, like
yeah,
when's it gonna be your turn? Like, that's not funny. Like,
no,
like
no, it's not.
I do not think that's funny. Like, like you have no idea. It's like, just like people don't ask if you're like a little chunky if you're pregnant. Like that, I feel like people have gotten that. Like, don't talk about women's bodies. Like, don't ask if somebody is pregnant. Like, and then it should be the same of like, don't ask when they're going to have children. Like, we're not in control of that. Like, don't ask that. Don't ask if somebody's going to have a second kid. Don't, like, you have no idea where someone is in their journey and like how open they are to talk about it, or,
I feel
and it's
like
none of your
older
business.
I feel like older people tend to be the worst offenders with these kinds of
Yeah.
things, at least in my experience.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and it's fun. They're coming from a place of like, they're coming
Yeah.
from a good place, but also like, just don't. It's
Yeah.
personal.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and
Yeah.
I agree with you. I like I said, I just have one. I birthed her, and 5 minutes after I birthed her, I had people asking me, "When's the
Yeah.
second coming?" I'm like, "I'm still in the
Yeah.
hospital. I'm still,
Yeah. Exactly.
I
Yeah.
can't even go to the bathroom yet. You're asking me when is the second one coming? Are you out of your mind?"
Yeah.
But that's social awareness. It's like
Yeah.
one of those things. It's not
Yeah.
distributed equally in the world. Thank you so much for sharing your story with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It is
Absolutely.
great to talk about it. It feels, it's a form of therapy too for me. like
Yeah.
just to get it off my chest and share, and hopefully, somebody relates or feels better or not as alone, and one person, like,
I'm
then I
sure
feel I
somebody
feel good
will.
about it.
I'm sure somebody will.